The Civil Rights era was a very pivotal period for African people worldwide. There were leaders and agents posing as leaders who helped to destabilize the struggle. The revisionists rewrote this period with a disrespectful pen. The shining black prince took a back seat for the man named Martin. Jesse became a minister and found himself in a narrative Uncle Clyde arranged. Dick Gregory was directly and indirectly involved in both Martin and Malcolm's death. All the evidence available will be discussed. Have your pens and paper ready. But back to Message to the Grassroots. This is 1963, and this is what Malcolm had to say about the Big Six. Once they formed it with the white man over it, he promised them and gave them $800,000 to split up between the Big Six, and told them that after the march was over, they'd be given $700,000 more, $1.5 million, split up between leaders that you've been following, going to jail for, crying crocodile tears for, and they're nothing more than Frank James and Jesse James, and what do you call them, brothers? So Malcolm was very much aware of what Dr. King them were attempting to do. So this is a very famous picture of 4 of the Big Six with President Kennedy and Lyndon Baines Johnson. As you can see, if we're going from the left, the third one, of course, is Dr. King. And then if you look to the right of in the picture of Dr. King, that's John Lewis, who was the last one of the Big Six that died last year. I want to say it was last year. In the middle is A. Philip Randolph, and to the right, as you can see, facing directly toward the camera, that is Roy Wilkins. So this is 4 of the Big Six meeting with Kennedy, President Kennedy. So Bayard Rustin, and for those of y'all that did not hear me the first time I said this, I have to repeat this. So I was in a bookstore in Richmond, Virginia, about a month and a half ago. And I was walking by looking at the books, and a book caught my attention, and I stopped. And I want to say the title of the book was The History of Queer America. I had to stop and look at it because as a historian in the 45 years I've been studying, I have no idea what that is. So on the cover was Bayard Rustin, and this is Bayard Rustin. Let's get something straight with this LGBTQ thing and what is taking place today, and of course, what is taking place in the past. There's always been gays in the Black community. There's always been gays in all communities. This is nothing new, but especially in the Black community. So it's kind of strange to hear people today, it's primarily the young generation, that don't understand. They have always been around. So here's Bayard Rustin, and you had James Baldwin, and you had quite a few that's in history. So this is nothing new. So Bayard Rustin was very instrumental in 2 things in the civil rights movement and prior to his death. And that is, number 1, he was the one that was behind the scenes teaching Dr. King how to be a good orator, because it was A. Philip Randolph who sent Bayard Rustin to the South to meet with Dr. King and collaborate with Dr. King. But it would also be Bayard Rustin that was behind the scenes who was putting together the March on Washington, D.C. He also debated Brother Malcolm. You can find that video. And like with everyone who debated Malcolm, it didn't go very well for Bayard Rustin. So this is Stephen Currier and his wife. This is the man who brought the Big Six together in the Carlisle Hotel. And you see the little sneaky grin on his face. And so again, he was very instrumental in making sure that the Big Six come together and make sure that we as a people did not advance at all. Only the Big Six advanced monetarily because of that money that they received. And here is the actual picture of the flyer of the March on Washington. All of the Big Six spoke. Now, I will give a little bit of credit to John Lewis. John Lewis attempted to speak radically, but that was stopped quickly. So this, of course, is where, Dr. King gave his very famous speech. And of course, it went down in annals as one of the best speeches of all time. So Dr. King, again, is second part of this presentation, and we're going to be momentarily getting into the details of his assassination. So March 28th, 1963, Dr. King, the March on Washington, Brother Malcolm X was out in the crowd. Dr. King was standing before the people. The rest, they say, is history. And here's a very famous picture. Now, the reason I'm putting this picture in here, I have to remind, especially Black people, African people, you do know that Malcolm was Black, right? And I'm saying that because we always seem to have had one or two leaders at the same time, and then the elites or white America has always pushed the one who was doing the most damage to us to the forefront, to the front. In this case, it was Dr. King. Here's Dr. King, as you can see, January 27, 1965. That man right there, a Rothschild, Jacob Rothschild, one of the elites, one of the elites. Why is this picture so important? Let's see. The Civil Rights Act of 1964. Dr. King, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Let's talk about Lyndon Baines Johnson for like 10 seconds. Lyndon Baines Johnson was a diehard racist. As a matter of fact, he called us the N-word on a daily basis, So how can anyone believe this man signed some legislation that was going to help out Negro people, as we would call? Insanity. As a matter of fact, what is wrong with this picture? Dr. King had nothing whatsoever to do with this legislation. None. It was Adam Clayton Powell of New York. Adam Clayton Powell was a congressman out of New York who had a lot of power in that particular day. He was behind the scenes pushing for this legislation that King gets the credit for. As a people, we have a lot of studying to do. So before I get to this famous picture, I've got to go back to Dr. King for a moment. Excuse me, not Dr. King. I have to go back to what I was saying. We have got to understand that it's very important to recognize the details of what is taking place, and we must also make sure that those that are standing before us or sitting before us, talking about our history, are studying our history. And I do mean studying our history. So this is a very famous picture. To the left is Hosea Williams. Next, that's Jesse Jackson. That's Dr. King, and there's Abernathy. We're about to get into a lot of details some of you have never heard, but I'm gonna start with this picture because this picture was cropped, or should I say was staged. There's another series of pictures that I don't have in here, and these pictures are found in Dr. Pepper's book, in one of Dr. Pepper's book. Actually, the way the sequence took place, it was Abernathy going up the steps. Excuse me. Dr. King was behind Abernathy. Hosea Williams was behind Dr. King, and Jesse was at the back. Jesse elbowed Hosea Williams out of the way so he could get into this picture. And if you notice, Dr. King is looking like shocked. And if you look at Abernathy, that's Abernathy. But look at Jesse, he's smiling. But there's something else important. If you notice, Abernathy and Dr. King, both of them have on ties. But if you look at Hosea Williams and Jesse Jackson, they don't have a tie. And we're going to get into why Jesse Jackson doesn't have a tie. This doesn't apply to Hosea Williams, but it definitely applies to Jesse Jackson. So here's Jesse again. There's Abernathy, there's Dr. King, and there's Jesse. And again, take notice, Jesse has on blue jeans and a shirt with no tie. And look at Dr. King's expression on his face. He's not paying Jesse any attention whatsoever. And so let me put this out as a sidebar. How many are aware that Jesse Jackson, when he joined up with Dr. King, wasn't even a clergy? He wasn't. And he would never have been with Dr. King if it wasn't for James Bevel, but that's another story in itself. And there's Jesse again without that tie. And he's leaving and he has left, matter of fact, Memphis to go back to Chicago with this shirt and blood on it. We're going to get into all the details about this shirt and this tie and Jesse Jackson. And lastly, there's Jesse again, still in them pants and that shirt, as you can see. And as a matter of fact, this particular picture was taken in April. April, and he has this long coat on. We're going to get into all of that. So most of those that were around Dr. King were frat boys. They were in the Divine Nine. Andrew Young, Y.T. Walker, and Y.T. Walker was from New York. He came out of church here in Petersburg, Virginia, which is Guilford Baptist Church. Dr. King made him the chief of staff, so he was very instrumental in what took place in the civil rights movement. Also, Bayard Rustin was in, Y.T. Walker was also in a quick segment of the Malcolm X movie with Denzel. He was the so-called doctor who came out and announced that Malcolm was dead. So why am I showing you about these fraternity brothers, the Divine Nine? We're going to cover all of this. And there's James Bevel. And James Bevel is not that well known. Out of all of those that was around Dr. King, he's probably one of the least known, but all of them had a very intricate part of this civil rights movement, whether good or bad. In the case with most of these that we're looking at, it was not good at all. So this is a video I need you to listen to.
When you were around 19 years old, Martin Luther King got assassinated.
No, I was older than that. I was a senior in college.
Okay, so you're about 22 or so?
I was 21.
21, okay. So you clearly remember as an adult the impact of that situation.
Well, for me, that was a small impact. I wound up being the last judge hearing the James Earl Ray matter. Did he, in fact, assassinate Dr. Martin Luther King? And had he not died and his local attorney.
Now I'm pausing this for a moment. Revisionist. For anyone that's listening to me, if you want to become a historian, if you go to college, there's certain words that we're taught. One of them is the word revisionist. A revisionist is a person who takes a narrative that's history, that is true, and they turn it into a lie. And that's what a lot of people in America that write history, they do. They revise the story. But the problem is, it's too much evidence around that historians know about. And so they quickly get destroyed in what they presented as fact. So the story, the narrative goes that James Earl Ray shot Dr. King with a .30-06. Listen close to the Judge Joe Brown. I'm gonna say this and then I'm gonna start the video again. Judge Joe Brown got his TV show, that TV show as a judge, because his life was threatened because of what he's talking about right here. Listen closely.
Not died in close succession, it would have been my finding that he was not the gunman. That Remington 760 Game Master they've got in the Civil Rights Museum is not the murder weapon. It's not even close. And it was a two-man hit team that killed him from the fire station dormitory. It wasn't the flop house and it wasn't in those bushes.
Now, I'm stopping it again. Did y'all hear what Judge Joe Brown said? There were two men that shot and killed him from the fire station and not the men in the bushes. Don't worry, we're going to get to all those names with proof. With proof, all those names, including the one who shot him. We're going to get to all of that. Oh, no, we're not. We're going to back up. There we go.
For me, that was a small impact. I wound up being the last judge hearing the James Earl Ray matter. Did he, in fact, assassinate Dr. Martin Luther King? And had he not died and his local attorney not died in close succession, it would have been my finding that he was not the gunman. That Remington 760 Game Master they've got in the Civil Rights Museum is not the murder weapon. It's not even close. And it was a two-man hit team that killed him from the fire station dormitory. It wasn't the flop house, and it wasn't in those bushes. So yeah, I got into the deep details of Dr. King, and that 3 or 4 year period that case was kicking around in front of me.
So you're saying that the James Earl Ray did not kill Martin
No,
Luther
he didn't
King,
kill.
even
And see,
even
they
though
keep
most people, well, he was
didn't
convicted
kill
for
him.
it, right?
He didn't kill him. It's interesting, the homicide file for the Memphis Police Department reaches the same conclusion back in 1968. They entered their file in protest to the DA's office. Their conclusion was Ray is not the gunman. He was not even in Memphis that day. We know conclusively where he was.
So why do you think he got convicted for the murder?
Well, he didn't get convicted. He pled guilty. You have to understand, though, the news media puts it out as he was the self-confessed killer of King. That's not true. All through the transcripts, the entirety of the record, he never confessed, and often he said, I never said I killed King. I didn't kill him. I'm pleading cause of Alford. That's ALFORD. It's a moderately old U.S. Supreme Court case, and it says, even if you are not actually guilty and you are pristinely innocent, you may plead guilty to the charge if you think that doing so is in your best interest under all of the circumstances as you know them to be, and you're doing so freely, voluntarily, understandingly, knowingly, advisedly, and intelligently. So Ray had gone through all of these and had lost, but there was something that came up. Modern scientific methodology took away one further necessary element. All of these things had to be there, and the state had to have a reasonable factual basis upon which to proceed otherwise. The thing the state relied upon was the rifle, but modern scientific methodology excluded that rifle from being the murder weapon. The bullet they pull out of King's body has a rate of rifling twist of 1 turn in every 11 1/4 inches. The rifle that Ray had a rate of rifling twist of 1 turn in every 10 inches and a bad manufacturing defect that is not apparent on the death slug. He was shot with an XM-21. It's a 7.62 by 51 millimeter NATO caliber weapon with a special stainless steel barrel, a 3-9 telescopic sight modified by a company known as Leatherwood. It was a Redfield sight, and they used special subsonic ammunition with a suppressor on the end to reduce the velocity of the bullet to below supersonic to confuse the sound signature. The shot came from the dormitory in the fire station through a window that had been slightly parted. They were several feet inside. It was a 2-man team, a spotter and a shooter. That's what he got killed by. If you shoot somebody at that close a range, which was about 50, 60 yards, with a 30 caliber rifle anywhere in the torso, if the individual is standing next to an emergency room, it's a non-survivable wound. But what they did is they took a head shot they almost missed because the bullet was reduced in velocity. It hit King on the right cheek, took out some molars, wrecked his tongue, came out between his jaws, left the body, hit his clavicle, ricocheted under the skin that covered the clavicle, nicked his carotid artery, went over his right shoulder, down across the back and lodged between the left scapula and his back skin. And the bullet never penetrated his thorax. Now that sounds a little weird, but it's not uncommon. So he bled out from the nicked carotid artery, and they almost missed the shot. And Ray was nowhere around.
So had he lived, you would have actually found James Earl Ray not guilty and released him from prison?
Well, He would have been close. He had another involvement in this whole thing, and that was that he was a willing part of what amounted to a conspiracy. He was one of about 4 or 5 alternative scapegoats, and they picked him for a number of reasons. I did talk to a Captain Tommy Smith, who retired as head of homicide for the Memphis Police Department, who was the first detective on the scene. He said the shot couldn't have been from the flop house because there was a window that he was supposed to have fired the shot out of, and who told me that I never found out. He said, but there was a limb about this thick growing diagonally through the window, and you couldn't even see the Lorraine Motel from that location. He said, I came back with crime scene in about an hour, and the whole tree had been cut down, and I found out there was a cut down order sent out to the sanitation department early that day, but they were on strike, so they weren't going to cut it down. So, you know, it gets back to the show. We're going to start bringing some reality back to television that's not the kind of dysfunctional reality that's so popular these days. We're going to start, you should have gotten this in the 4th, 5th, or 6th grade. You didn't. I know you didn't, but here's what the rule is, and let's see if you can become good.
So that was, of course, Judge Joe Brown. Now, again, I'm showing you these videos because these are the ones that were definitely involved directly or indirectly with with Dr. King. And so this is William Pepper. Now, before I show you what William Pepper has to say about this, and we're going to tie all this together. We're going to tie it all together, and I'm going to tell you where all of this evidence is. I'm not going to leave you hanging like most people do. They tell you something, and where did you get that? Oh no, I'm gonna give you all that you need. So this is Pepper. Now, Pepper wrote several books: Orders to Kill, The Plot to Kill King, and there was two more. I actually had 2 of them. I have The Plot to Kill King and Orders to Kill, which I no longer have. So in Pepper's book, The Plot to Kill King, Pepper said, and he's still living. He lives in England. His life was threatened because he was the one that was involved with this. For those of you that are in your 40s and 50s, you might have remembered HBO gave a special back in the 90s, in 93, I think it was. And they had a mock trial. And Pepper was the one representing James Earl Ray. And that's where all this information came out. And by the way, the American government has it. And of course, they knew about it anyway. They were part of it. So they knew about it. So they suppressed it. But Pepper let it out in his book because he was a part of it. And what's strange is you can't find that documentary nowhere. I've tried to find that. I've also tried to find the footage of Jesse Jackson on the Today Show, and we're going to get into that as well. So what Pepper says in his book, he says this: I feel as though it's my fault that Dr. King was killed. And when I first read that line, I paused because I'm trying to figure out in my mind, why would he say that? Because at that time, I'd never even heard of Pepper. But after I read it, it made a lot of sense. If y'all remember, Dr. King never had any inspirations of being in the political world. It was Pepper that got Dr. King to start looking at politics. And once he started Dr. King down the road called politics, he introduced him to this little unknown conflict that they call a war that wasn't a war. Korea and Vietnam were not wars. So Pepper introduced Dr. King to Vietnam and showed him all these pictures. And Dr. King now is turning toward humanitarianism. So he was trying to become a world humanitarian. That being said, he decided to run for president. And the man who gave him this idea is William F. Pepper. So a man by the name of Dr. Benjamin Spock was chosen to be his running mate. This is what got Dr. King killed. And it made sense, made a lot of sense. Now, is that to say that they wouldn't have tried to kill him anyway because of what he was trying to do for African people? I said, yes. And that's opinionated. Very rarely will you ever hear me say anything like that during a presentation. but it's the possibility is extremely great. Dr. King was going to meet death at some point anyway. And the irony is Malcolm was killed at 39. Dr. King was killed at 39. So let's listen to what Pepper say. We're going to tie all this in together. And this is Dr. William Pepper.
Now, did the shot actually kill him? And if not, how did he die?
No, the shot did not kill him. We all believed that Martin King was killed by that shot by Strausser. He was still alive when he was taken to the hospital. He was being worked on in the emergency room of the hospital. And I think the emergency staff were trying to do their best to keep him alive. And he was still breathing and alive. When the head of neurosurgery of the hospital, Dr. Breen Bland, came in to the emergency room with 2 other men in suits. And he said to the people in the emergency room, "Stop working on that nigger and let him die." And then he said, after a pause, "Now get out of here, all of you. Leave this room. Get out." And he emptied the room. And as he was emptying the room, a surgical nurse was the last one out. And she heard them do this, like picking up water in their mouths. And that caught her attention, and she turned and she saw them spit on the body of Dr. King, the 3 men. Then she saw Bland, Dr. Bland, take a pillow and put it over his face and suffocate him. And that's how Martin King was killed. Now you can say, oh, you only had 1 witness. You had this black surgeon.
Now I'm going to stop because that's the most important part of this video. And as you can see, that's the name of the video. You can go to YouTube and get it. I advise you to get it quick because right now they're censoring a lot of material. I've known about this for years. So as you can see, this is the grainy video. And this is when Pepper, of course, gotten older. And like I said, I believe he's still living. And I do know he's in England. He's in England. So he knows this. So we're going to get into all these names that you just heard, including Lula Mae Shelby. Lula Mae Shelby. She was the black surgical nurse that he just referenced.
Now,
this is Billy Cowles, Samuel Billy Cowles, Reverend. There were 2 men on Clyde Tolson's list of informants and spies of Dr. King that became very well known. Billy Cowles is one of them, and the other one, Messy Jesse Jackson. They were on the payroll of Clyde Tolson. And who's Clyde Tolson? Clyde Tolson was the lover of J. Edgar Hoover. As a matter of fact, Billy Cowles and Jesse Jackson referred to him as Uncle Clyde. So he was paying them. And again, you're going to get all the proof that goes along with that. So here's Billy Cowles. Now, it's a strange thing. When we do something that's not good, at some point in our lives or death, it's going to surface. It's going to float to the top. It's going to surface. So this is Billy Cowles, Samuel Billy Cowles, talking about the King assassination. Listen closely to what he's saying, live on NBC.
But what you're fixing to witness now is the man who came by to get King to take him to dinner. And 30 years later at a press conference, he slipped because God do baffle your mind sometimes. You look,
are geared especially for the young who did not have a chance to get the feel or to know what the civil rights movement actually was about. Even as they marched, now they could have stopped in a hotel, but when you think about marching from Memphis to Jackson or Jackson to Memphis, there were no hotels. You stayed in churches, you stayed in people's homes, and that's how we got over, that's how we got through. The struggle was a spiritual struggle. You couldn't pay people to do what we had to do. You couldn't pay people to stand before mad dogs and fire hoses and billy clubs and cattle prods. It was strictly a spiritual and moral movement. So we wanted that dimension to be in the pilgrimage to Memphis. We will revisit the mountaintop speech site. That's the Mason's Temple, where Dr. King made his last address, which he almost didn't make, because the night that we were having that rally, there were tornado warnings, and he was behind on the Poor People's Campaign. And he said, you guys go on over and have the rally. I want to stay at the motel and work on the Poor People's Campaign. When we got there and Dr. Abernathy walked in and Jesse Jackson walked in and I walked in and others, people started clapping because they thought Martin was behind us. And so Ralph's preacher sense said to him, this is not our crowd. And he went to the phone and called Dr. King. And any of the marches that we had in those days, you have an opportunity to bring the children and bring the family and march with us. And when I finished sharing with them the last hour of Dr. King's life, a hurry. But that gave me the wonderful privilege of spending the last hour on earth. 3 preachers in a room, Abernathy, King, and Kyle. And we spent that last hour together in room 306 at the Lorraine Motel. The press is always curious, and writers, what went on? What did you talk about? I say, we just talk preacher talk. What preachers talk about when they get together.
Y'all pay real attention to what you're fixing to hear now.
About 5:45, we walked on the balcony, and he was talking to people in the courtyard. He stood here and I stood there. Only as I moved away, so we could have a clear shot, the shot rang out.
Thank you.
I turned around and then announced him back on the balcony.
Now let me stop. That's Samuel Billy Cowles on NBC. Now, Dick Gregory got a hold of this video. You can't find it now. They suppressed. Once they realized a mistake is made in the media, they covered very quickly. And so under the Freedom of Information Act, you can get your hands on this material, but it's usually 50, 60 years after the fact when everyone's dead. So, and most people today are not studying history. It's only a few of us are studying. So let's tie all this together. Billy Cowles first. Let's stay right here. First of all, here's the first lie Billy Cowles told. We were in the room and we was talking some preacher talk. Billy Cowles wasn't in the room. He wasn't even in the room. That's a lie. It was only Abernathy and Dr. King. That was it in the room. So once we see everything that I need you to see, I'm going to give you the whole unscripted narrative of what happened with Dr. King with the names of who did what, so you can hear this. All right. Now is a good time to tie this all together. This is a very famous picture. The man you see to the front near the middle, that's Andrew Young. Standing beside Andrew Young, to that hand you see on the railing, that's Abernathy. Then you see the lady right here in the forefront. She's supposed to be a cleaning lady, and I can't remember her name. Right beside her, you see that afro, that is Jesse Jackson. That's Dr. King laying down on the balcony. And the man that's kneeling over Dr. King, he's one of the most important people in this picture. His name is Merle McCullough, or should I say his name was Merle McCullough. So let's tie this picture together and let's go over some facts that I'm going to give you the information where you can go and look this up, read it for yourself. So Jesse Jackson, who was not a minister at the time, he was one of Clyde Tolson's boys, along with Samuel Billy Cowles. Dr. King was put in room 202. He was on the 2nd floor, not the 3rd floor. It would be Jesse Jackson who would call the Lorraine Hotel and have Dr. King moved to the 3rd floor. Unbeknownst to him, they would move him to room 306. Why? Because on the second floor, they could not have gotten a good shot at Dr. King. So that's what Jesse came into the picture. But the third floor, there's a couple of rooms that are very important. And I'm just going to focus on two of them. Room 306, that's where Dr. King was with Abernathy. They always were together. That was his best friend. Room 316 is where the invaders were. Now, the invaders was like an offshot of the Black Panthers, and they were armed. So what happened was around 6:05, a little bit after that, Billy Cowles would come and Billy Cowles would knock on the door. Dr. King came to the door with Abernathy behind him. No one was on that balcony, no one but two people, Samuel Billy Cowles and Jesse Jackson. It should have been three people out there. The third one that should have been out there is Abernathy. But Abernathy said a line that to this day still baffles a lot, questioning, was he involved in Dr. King's death? Because he said, I need to go back in to get some aftershave lotion, which was strange. So Dr. King comes out on the balcony. Samuel Billy Cowles steps to the right, about 6 feet, as you heard him say in the video. And you heard him said, Billy Cowles said that Dr. King was talking to people down below on the ground. No, he wasn't. He wasn't talking to people. He was talking to one man. He was talking to Jesse Jackson. Why was he talking to Jesse Jackson? Remember the pictures I showed you where he didn't have on a shirt and tie? This is the code for the shooters. Everyone that does not have on a shirt and tie, are friendlies. In other words, they're not targeted for death. But there were several people that should have been shot that day, not just Dr. King. That's another story, and I don't want to get that deep into that. I really don't. So let's tie in what happened. So while Dr. King is in this argument with Jesse about this shirt and tie, that's when the shot rang out. Well, who fired the shot? Because it wasn't James Earl Ray, as you heard Judge Brown alluded to. And again, the reason why, because he knows this, he said it already, which has been substantiated. James Earl Ray wasn't even in Memphis. And had he been there in the flop house, like Judge Brown know and the historians know, it was impossible for him to shoot him because there was a tree in the line of fire. So who actually pulled the trigger that shot Dr. King? His name was Frank Strasser. He was with the Memphis Police Department. The spotter, that's the person who points the target, his name was Lieutenant Earl Clark. He was the spotter. Well, Mr. Beverly, Professor Beverly, where do you get that information from? Several sources that the government has. One is The Plot to Kill King by William F. Pepper. Also, you had Steve Coakley. Steve Coakley was on this back in the 90s. Everyone knows this. Anyone that been around that time know about Steve Coakley, who strangely died. And there were others that I can get into, but I'm just giving you those two, especially those two because The Plot to Kill King, everything that is mentioned right now by me and on this video is in that book that the American government had that was broadcast live on HBO. It's not a secret. So now let's get back to this picture. Merle McCullough is bent over Dr. King. Why was Merle McCullough bent over Dr. King? Merle McCullough, who also, I told you Dr. King had a whole lot of informants around him, and Merle McCullough is another one. As a matter of fact, Merle McCullough was one of those who plotted the death of Dr. King. So he was a Vietnam vet. That is why they're pointing. Merle McCullough, once he bent over Dr. King, the intent was to check his vitals to make sure he was dead. He told everyone that was up there, the ones that are pointing, the shot came from over that direction because I'm a Vietnam vet. And being a Vietnam vet, I know about the sounds of shots. It did not come from where they were pointing to. Came from another direction, as it said from that firehouse window. So Merle McCullough and them were all in on this. And so Dr. Breen Bland stated that if that nigger does not die on the balcony, make sure that he comes to St. Joseph's Hospital. And that's where Dr. William Pepper told you the story. When he got there, he was still breathing. Now, was it a possibility of him living? Not likely, because remember, Judge Joe Brown explained in detail about the trajectory of the round, how it hit the body, what it did to the body. He would have been a vegetable had he been alive, but the damage was done. So Merle McCullough and Jesse Jackson both ran to the right. Instead of the short stuff that you see right there, what they were standing close to, they ran to the right. Why? Because Merle McCullough was coming up along with Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson had to check room 316. Why did he want to check room 316? Because the invaders were in there with weapons. They didn't want a shootout in Memphis. So Jesse had to make sure that the invaders were gone. And again, Merle McCullough, who's bent over him, checked the vitals. And that's how this picture came to be. So here we go. There's Abernathy standing between a police officer, and that's Andrew Young, who's still living. There's Jesse Jackson looking toward him with that shirt on, and there's Merle McCullough. Merle McCullough is the one you see with his hand behind the back, and you see the maid looking. Now, let's get into something else Jesse did. Did y'all know that Jesse Jackson was the only one in Memphis, Tennessee to get out the city? No one else got out the city. No one driving on a bicycle, on a plane, on a bird's back. No one got out of Memphis, Tennessee, but Jesse Jackson. Why? Because they had to make sure the narrative got told correctly. So Jesse has always said up to this very day, I was the last one to hold Dr. King in my arms. Andrew Young and all of them were there, said that's a lie. Said Jesse got the blood on his shirt because he ran up that balcony. I told you stopped in room 316 to make sure the invaders were gone. Then he came down to Dr. King, bent over, stuck his hands in the blood, wiped it on his shirt, and walked away. He was flown out of Memphis, Tennessee, and he went to Chicago and met with a man by the name of Don Rose. Don Rose arranged for Jesse to speak on 2 shows. One of them was Meet the Press. Strangely, you can't get your hands on that video. Why? Because they have the video, but they're suppressing the information. Why? Because that information would tell you everything I just said, but it still came out. Again, when you do something, it's going to come out eventually. So that is how Jesse Jackson got the blood on his shirt. So Jesse said that Dr. King wanted him to ascend to take the place of him if something happened. Nothing can be further than the truth. Dr. King's last speech was, I've been to the mountaintop. I've seen the promised land. I might not get there with you as a people, but I'll get there. And if you look at that video and look at Dr. King's face, you can see fear. But there's something they didn't show you. They didn't show you what happened when he walked away from the podium. Jesse Jackson is standing to the left. Abernathy is standing to the right. Both are clapping their hands. And Jesse has that turtleneck shirt on. For 3 days he wore it, including the funeral of Dr. King. And which, matter of fact, he was walking in front of Coretta Scott King. And Coretta Scott King turned their head when Jesse turned to look at her. So Jesse has put out this false narrative about this for over, 50 years now? So that's the narrative that he's put out. So Jesse Jackson went on to Meet the Press. And then again, he's been telling this fabrication, this lie about he was supposed to rise up. I play chess. I teach chess. The pawn is the least most powerful piece on the board. The queen is the most powerful piece on the board. And then, of course, it's the king. Dr. King was the queen. Abernathy was the king. And then he would go down with Hosea Williams and others. Jesse was just a pawn. How does a pawn ascend to the role of leadership when you're nothing? So everything that they have been saying concerning Jesse is incorrect. Now, here is an actual drawing, as you can see, of where they said James Earl Ray fired the shot to kill Dr. King. And as you can see, there's room 306 where the arrow is pointing. And then you see that flop house, but notice you don't see a tree there because they cut it down, which Judge Joe Brown spoke about that. But over here to the left side is where that shot actually came out. And there's Dr. King. This picture is found in The Plot to Kill King. Strangely, when he came out with the next edition of this book, this picture is missing because there were 2 rounds in him. And where did the second one come from? We don't know. But we do know there's a person in the history narrative about Dr. King. I haven't gotten to that name yet, but we're about to get to that name in a minute concerning this possible shooter with this bullet. Here we go. Buddy Butler. Now, Buddy Butler was Black. Buddy Butler was a taxi cab driver. Buddy Butler was one of those that was at the scene of King's assassination. He stated he saw someone jump out some bushes and ran down the street. Before the day was over, strangely, this man was dead. Before the day was over, he was dead, just for making that statement. Frank Strasser. This is the man who actually shot Dr. King. This is the man right here. There's his name. And that's in the plot to kill King, along with all the rest of this information that I'm giving you. And of course, the American government has it. Lieutenant Earl Clark. He was the spotter. Merle McCullough. That's the one that was bent over Dr. King. And Johnny Barger, he was another one that sat down in that restaurant and they discussed the details of how they were going to kill King, of course, with the government in the shadows. Nurse Lula Mae Shelby. This is the one that you heard being spoken about by William Pepper. Pepper stated that there was a surgical nurse that heard the sound of them hocking up the spit on Dr. King. Well, this is the one who made that statement. And this is a part of the narrative. It got told to those that were involved in investigating Dr. King. And she had an issue with returning to that place after this transpired. Dr. Breen Bland, the head chief surgeon of St. Joe's Hospital. This is the one who spit on Dr. King. This is the one that took the pillow and made sure Dr. King would never, ever have a chance to recover. Now, Earl Caldwell, journalist, was the only reporter present. Strangely, ABC wasn't there, CBS wasn't there, NBC was not there. Those were the 3 major news carriers during that time. There was no cable television. I lived in that time period as a child, so I can tell you. There was only 3. That was ABC, CBS, and NBC. Weren't there. Caldwell was there, so he had an exclusive to history. Solomon Jones and Caldwell both said, just like Buddy Butler, we saw some men jump out of the bushes. Nothing happened to them. Now, I think the reason why this is speculation, only speculation, which is a rarity. We normally don't speculate or have opinions when we do presentations, historians don't. So Earl Caldwell was media. And I think this is maybe the reason why nothing happened to him. Solomon Jones, who drove the limousine from the funeral office, the funeral parlor, I'm sorry, that Dr. King would drive in when he came to Memphis, Solomon Jones was his driver. Guess what? He was an informant. Again, there's a whole lot of informants around Dr. King. And Ernestine Campbell, very well-known name, Ernestine Campbell, she was one that said that she saw something kind of strange, as well as Betty Spett, S-P-A-T-E. Now, Betty Spett said that as she was driving by slowly, she knew something was going on, and she saw Jesse put some type of metallic object into a bag. We don't know what that was, but we do know that Jesse had a bag under his arm all the way to the very end. Not only that, Jesse ran up the steps past Betty Spett and she drove off. Now, strangely with Jesse, there's a whole lot about Jesse many don't know concerning the Dr. King assassination, and it would take a lot of time. I do PowerPoint presentations in person. I certainly can do that, but we're just going to go into just the basics, and again with the proof. So Stokely Carmichael. Stokely Carmichael is one of those that was mentioned in part 1. I wanted you to see him. He changed his name to Kwame Ture. And again, the reason why I want you to see this picture of who he was, I actually saw him at the Million Man March in 1995. I was there. I was one of that 2 million. But understand this. Again, the American government always knew who was a threat to them and versus who was not. So for those of us that love Dr. King, that's fine. If that's the narrative you want to run with, that's what you subscribe to, fine. But he was not a threat to anyone whatsoever, except for African people. He was a threat to us because he took that buyout. So there's no doubt about that whatsoever. Sorry to tell you the truth, but it is what it is. And again, I showed you in part one that memo that was in the COINTEL papers. And that memo, again, mentioned 4 people and 4 people only. Dr. King, who they said was passive and non-aggressive, absolutely correct. Elijah Muhammad, who they said was an old man, was no threat whatsoever, absolutely correct. And KWAME TURE, him, Stokely Carmichael, who was up and coming, who could possibly be a threat. But Malcolm X was indeed a threat. And this is the reason why they killed Brother Malcolm first, because they were not concerned with the rest. So they had to be told. And this is Steve Coakley, Ashe. He's now an ancestor. Coakley is one of those who was the first to start speaking about the Boule and the King assassination. And he had a lot of information. And some of the information that you heard from Pepper and others, they all collaborated and they knew what each other had. So Coakley was going around the country talking about Jesse Jackson and his involvement and some of the details I've told you here today. So this is a video, and I moved this to the end because it's an additional piece of information. And I want you to see this. Now, this video, I am not going to stop. And the reason why I'm not going to stop it, I want you to see this in its entirety, because I said this in part one. Many people in the Nation of Islam say they don't understand why the Black historian and white historians and white people or whoever consider them complicit in Malcolm's death. I've said this many times. No one would have said anything about the Nation of Islam, but the Nation of Islam is the only one out of the 4 entities that have said, we had nothing to do with it. The American government has never disavowed anything. They've never said nothing whatsoever. We did it, we didn't do it. The mafia has never said we did it, we didn't do it. The New York Police Department never said we didn't or we did do it. All of them have been silent. Only the Nation of Islam have said they were not involved. Now, I want everyone to be very understanding of what I'm saying. Is Professor Bobby stating that the Nation of Islam in its entirety, everybody was involved in Malcolm's death? No, I'm not saying that at all. But let me show you this man right here who's about to speak, and listen closely to his words, because he was an agent. And guess where he was? In the Nation of Islam. And he was one of them. So for them to keep saying that no one was in the nation that was involved in Malcolm's death, for real. Well, let's listen. Let's see exactly what this man is saying. Listen closely.
The following program contains intense violence and strong language that may not be suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
This statement is from Messenger Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the Muslims in America. Minister Malcolm Shabazz, addressing a public meeting at Manhattan Center in New York City on Sunday, December the 1st, did not speak for the Muslims when he made comments on the death of the President, John F. Kennedy. He was speaking for himself and not Muslims in general. And Minister Malcolm has been suspended from public speaking for the time being. Mr. Muhammad's correct statement on hearing of the death of the President was as follows. We with the world are very shocked at the assassination of our President, and the nation still mourns the loss of our President. And he has said that it seems that every president who speaks out on behalf of the Negro has been assassinated, from Lincoln to President Kennedy.
In January of 1965, Malcolm told 2 of his top aides that he had to make an important trip to Los Angeles. He had to get some important information from 2 of the girls that Elijah had knocked up. Using the fictitious name of David in an attempt to keep a low profile, Malcolm boarded a plane from New York and flew to Los Angeles. Malcolm's cousin, Hakeem A. Jamal, who wrote the book From a Dead Level, Malcolm X and Me, was waiting inside the airport terminal with an old friend of Malcolm named Edward Bradley. While Jamal and Bradley were waiting for Malcolm to arrive, they noticed a well-dressed black man sitting in the lounge who Jamal thought he saw somewhere before. Jamal said to Bradley, "Wow, that guy looks like a black Muslim." Jamal couldn't stop staring at this well-dressed black man he thought was a black Muslim. But when the man got up and walked over to a cigarette machine and purchased a pack of menthol cigarettes and lit one up, Jamal dismissed the whole thought. Jamal's dismissal didn't last long, because in less than a nanosecond, his eyes were back on the well-dressed man toting on that stogie. Jamal's eyes followed the man like an eagle protecting its nest. It was the cigarette that the man kept puffing on that was challenging his initial thought. Muslims don't smoke, so how in the world could this man be a black Muslim? And then suddenly, Jamal realized that he indeed was correct. The well-dressed stranger that he couldn't make his mind up about was the National Secretary of the Nation of Islam, John Ali. And then, as if they came out of the woodwork, several black Muslims suddenly appeared, and the airport was crawling with them. It was obvious they were not there to hug and kiss Malcolm. They were there to kill him. Either someone in Malcolm's camp betrayed him, or law enforcement alerted the black Muslims about Malcolm's trip to Los Angeles. Realizing the immediate danger Malcolm was in, and that his plane would arrive at any minute, Jamal quickly alerted airport security, and the plane that Malcolm was on was diverted to a different terminal. Malcolm describes the incident in his own words.
The black Muslim movement tried to kill me in Los Angeles airport while I was in the company of the Los Angeles police. The Los Angeles police stopped the TWA airlines from taking off. They slipped me into a private room onto the plane through the basement because of the presence of these persons in the airport who were completely heedless of the presence of the police. Now, this airliner was held up an hour and a half. Every passenger aboard it was taken off. His luggage was searched. I was kept on the plane. My luggage was searched. And then the TW Airlines security agent flew to Chicago from Los Angeles with me. I was met at the airport in Chicago by the Assistant Attorney General of the state of Illinois and at least 20 different detectives. I was held in their custody for 24 hours. I appeared on the Cupsonet show. When I came out of the studio, officials of the black Muslim movement in Chicago even tried to attack the police to get at me. Police department from coast to coast in this country have the black Muslim movement well infiltrated, just as they have any other group well infiltrated. They are well aware of these plots and discussions that take place.
Malcolm couldn't have had a worse enemy against him more than John Ali. This was a cold-blooded nigger who would brave the very fires of hell to get what he wanted. This was the one man Elijah was scared of. Ali's fixed, unemotional, and uninteresting-looking face did, however, emote his soulless spirit and cunning gaze, supported by his lowered shoulders, reminiscent of a rat poised to strike. When his weekly paycheck given to him by Elijah Muhammad was threatened, Malcolm didn't stand a chance.
But on a program in Chicago called Hotline, was moderated by Wesley South, John Ali, the national secretary, admitted, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday, one of these days last week, that they absolutely were going to kill me. John Ali, the national secretary, admitted, that they absolutely were going to kill me. That they absolutely were going to kill me. John Ali, the national secretary, by Wesley South. Secretary admitted, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday, one of these days last week, that they absolutely were going to kill me. That they absolutely were going to kill me. That they absolutely were going to kill me.
Okay, Here's the deal. John Ali arrived in New York on February 19, 1965, and checked into the Americana Hotel. He meets with the shooters, and they go over their plans a few more times. After Malcolm is killed, Ali is supposed to immediately fly back to Chi-Town to solidify his airtight alibi concerning his whereabouts. It's important that Ali stands visibly alongside Elijah Muhammad during this press conference, slated for February 22, 1965. The press conference starts on the agreed time, but Ali is not present. John Ali missed his flight back to Chicago and had to take the next flight out to be at the press conference. Naturally, the press conference had to start without John Ali. Elijah Muhammad was accompanied by his son, Herbert Muhammad, and one of his top aides, Minister James Shabazz. These two men looked on nervously as the press reporters asked the head of the organization some serious questions about Malcolm's assassination. Elijah's son and the chief advisor carefully listened and hoped the old man wouldn't fuck up, because they knew that these news reporters could be very shrewd in getting someone to say something they had no intentions on saying and would later regret, or would have to embarrassingly backtrack live on camera. It was like, I hope his brain doesn't fail now. If the old man fucked it up, the whole crew could instantly go down. They knew they killed Malcolm, and they had other things on their minds, like car payments, child support, another trip to Switzerland, and that kind of shit. And they knew that those material comforts in life could all go up in smoke if the wrong words were spoken. Damn, where's John Ali? The old man will keep the story straight if he's here. The press conference was set for less than 12 minutes, but with these tough questions being asked, it seems like it's an hour. And so far, Elijah's doing well in answering the reporters' questions. John Ali's absence has not yet been a major factor, but no one's out the woods yet, and beads of cold sweat are starting to form on 3 foreheads, and it's not because of hot camera lights. And of course, the questions were anticipated. Mr. Muhammad, did the Muslims kill Malcolm? Nah, we don't get down like that. How could you ask me something like that? We don't carry guns. You must be new on the job. You should know better than that. Malcolm was killed by God.
Now, I'm pausing it right here because you had another video that's very long. Now, Omar Shabazz was actually a part of the nation, and he was having issues. He was having issues with the nation, because he was starting to find things out, and he started doing these documentaries, short documentaries about Brother Malcolm's death. So I wanted to address that. So this is yet another video that you could find easily. And like I said, I'd be looking for this kind of material. So I apologize for the profanity, but this is how some of us speak, and I understand that. So I wanted y'all to see that as well.
The following
Here's some of the sources. This is the book, Killing the Dream. This book goes into some of the details of some of the people that were around Dr. King. One of the most poignant arguments that's in this book is were they government agents or were they just local agents? Orders to Kill, which I told you about. This is one of William Pepper's book, along with The Plot to Kill King, another one of Pepper's book. The Orders to Kill covers most of the details of Dr. King in detail, but The Plot to Kill King covers the trial and all of those that was involved indirectly or not directly. That was, of course, from the HBO special. There's The Plot to Kill King. So you want to get these books quickly. And with that, we'll come to conclusion. While the civil rights period did not end here, I certainly was nearing the end. Irene Morgan and others, I can't see behind the screen, so I have to go along with it, what I see. And Fannie Lou Hamer are but a few more of the leaders who fought physically and articulately to convey the importance of the struggle. Did they achieve their goal, the goal? No, they tried. Why did they fail? Because the majority did not want any reminders of the ills of their ancestors. So while those in power enjoyed the fruits of the former property's labor, the children of former chattel property will suffer. Let them struggle. And they did, and they do. And I'd like to thank everyone who is in attendance for this. Here's my contact information. There's some other information out as well. And here's my background. And at this time, if anyone have any questions, I'll take 1 or 2 questions. If not, I will conclude, and I will be returning in 2 weeks. And that will be the presentation on eugenics. And that's very much needed right now, especially with this Roe versus Wade. I'll be connecting the two together. And approximately 2 weeks after that, no, the following week after that, I will be touching on Obama. Now, most people say, well, you shouldn't touch President Obama. He's the first Black president. That's what you think, that's fine. So at this time, any questions? If not, then I will conclude. Any questions? Can't see, so I can't say.
I had a question.
All right.
Could you clarify? I noticed that some groups use the words civil rights, but that's not the traditional definition. If you could differentiate when people are saying civil rights now versus the traditional definition.
Okay, good question. Civil rights is dealing with a man's right. It's almost similar to what they call natural rights. So natural rights, civil rights, it is just equality for people. That is it. This became very well known primarily in America because, you know, again, the Europeans have been suppressing and oppressing African people worldwide. So we came up with these different forms of obtaining some type of civility and some type of protection and equality. So we came up with these terms. Anyone else? Questions?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And we will see you for eugenics.
For eugenics. And I thank everyone for their support. Thank you. Continue to share this information. And please contact me if you have any questions or you want me to perform any lectures or have a lecture for you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.